Alrighty, so I'm going to get going because we are just past 2 o'clock now. So welcome to The Secret to Sales is There Is No Secret. I thought the title might feel a little bit intriguing, but basically it's a true story. There really isn't any secret to sales. So I want to go through the slides. Obviously my first slide is lovely to meet you, because it really is. And those of you who have returned for take 2, thank you so much. I'm incredibly grateful. And we had some technical problems last week, so this is take 2, but you may be here for the first time, and if you are, thank you so much for coming. It's really lovely to meet you. So let's move on. I want to ask you a question before we even go into any of the content here, and you can use the chat to give me your answers. I've got lovely Sarah with me. She is on the chat. She's looking after all of the things that you put in there. So here's your question. What do you feel when you hear the word sales? So put your answers in the chat. Let's find out. Where have you come from and what do you feel about sales? Just one word that springs to mind. What's coming up? The first word you think of. And while you carry on popping those words in, I'm just going to tell you just a little bit about me. I've noticed a couple of the webinars I've been on before have been very much about the person presenting, probably a little bit too long. And I want to just make you aware of just a little bit about me so that you understand why we can spend the next hour together, and hopefully I can give you value. So here is my sales road trip. So I started at 16. I left school at 16 and I went to work in NatWest Bank. So that was my first ever job. I mean, I was only just 16, so that was a little bit scary, but really exciting. I always wanted to work. I wasn't academic. I didn't want to study. I just wanted to work, earn money, and build a career. And really, throughout my whole career, it was all about sales. It was all about people, because people is what I love. I love people. So my whole career progressed right through sales. I did a little bit of accounts at the beginning, but realized really quickly I didn't like that. So I've been in recruitment, I've sold Yellow Pages, and of course the last Yellow Pages was printed in 2018. Can you believe that? They do not exist anymore in paper format. It's a very sad day. Recaro car seats were really famous, and anyone who knows motorsport will remember Recaro, and they're still around now. I sold stainless steel for 8 years. So look, these are the markets I've been in. So very technical markets, very male dominated markets as well when I was quite young, which were fantastic for learning and hugely challenging. So I'm delighted I had that experience. I sold hospitality at sporting events. You might recognize that's Monaco in that picture, anyone who likes Grand Prix. I worked in a venue for 5 years, so I sold space. That's an interesting one, selling space to people. If that space isn't filled, it costs you money. And I've also sold exhibition stands too. And I had a little adventure when my son was born in 2005, where, next slide, John, I took my business, which I created when Sam was 3 months old. Yes, I was completely mad, but I took my business, Truly Madly Baby, into Dragon's Den in 2005. And this is not the webinar for that story, but there's lots of opportunities for you to find that story out if you don't know it already. But it actually was a business that was really successful. And by 2007, I had actually grown my business to a point where I was winning awards. I'd got over 400 consultants across the country doing party plan parties, selling baby products. And I'd got national press coverage. It was fantastic. It was an amazing, amazing journey. But sadly, in 2008, I was unfortunate to lose everything. Yeah, next slide, John. 2008, I was unfortunate to lose everything of that business. And the story for that one, if you're interested in it, is in my TEDx talk, which I did in Brighton in 2018. And that's called There's No Such Word as Can't. So if you want to connect with me, make sure you do, because I can send you any of these links if you're interested in what happened next. Let's just say I kind of lost it all and I had to go back to work. And of course, then you're in the next part of my journey, which is actually going back into sales, working for people. And now, before I bust some myths and move into the presentation and the real reason that you're all here, I wanted to just chat with Sarah and find out what were the words that came up for everyone, Sarah, on the chat. Do you want to tell us what came up?
Yeah, it feels like the words, Jules, were split into kind of two halves. So I guess maybe the ones that are kind of a bit less surprising, some of those negative ones, things like makes me feel nervous, it's about being sold to, pushy, uncomfortable, complicated, a roller coaster. And then some things that feel a bit more positive. So it's about relationship building, creating opportunities and conversation, that it's good, it's about the customer. And somebody said it also depends on the perspective, so where you are in that sales journey, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I guess I wanted those kind of gut feel words, which I'm actually not surprised about. And I'm also delighted there's positive ones in there too. I think we are actually on a journey to really understanding what sales is, but there's still quite a long way to go. And I want to just talk about some myths that I feel are really prominent around sales. So I've got 3 different kind of categories for these. So if we look at that first slide, there's obviously a reason why we go into business and run businesses, and that's because we want to make money, or we certainly want to bring money into our business. So revenue, it's important. It is definitely an important part of running a business. However, most of the jobs I've worked in, most of the sales teams I've worked in have absolutely made this their real focus. And predominantly, it's all been about the numbers. So the number of calls we make, the number of emails we send, the number of appointments that we have. And of course, then on the back of that, we then look at targets. And so then it's about what targets we're hitting and how often we're hitting them. And this feels like a really big pressure point when you're working in a sales team. And actually, the focus is just completely wrong, because when you start focusing on these things, what you do start forgetting is the things that are the most important things, which I'm going to talk more about in this webinar. The words closing for me were always prominent in any sales training that I had. How to close the customer down. I mean, the word just in itself gives me kind of goosebumps, because I don't believe it's about closing. I believe it's actually about creating and starting relationships, as some of you said in the chat a moment ago. And the whole winning premise is very prominent in that competitive sales environment, and it is always about winning the business and winning the customer over. And I think that this needs to just change into more of a collaborative approach, as you'll see when I go through the presentation. So let's bust those myths. This is not where we start in sales. We do start with the buyer, but sadly, here's what happens again. We're looking at numbers of buyers. So how many people can we get to follow us, and how many people can we call and email and pounce straight on them and try to sell? And of course, as buyers, we're actually not quite as silly as we are made out to be. And then there's things like their need. We think, or the myth busting here, we are led to think that they need what we've got. And so there's a huge amount of assumption happens in sales, and certainly in training around sales. We are still putting focus on these things. We also think that they want it now. So whatever we've got to sell them, they're going to want it right now. And of course, this is another thing that I want to talk about in today's presentation, because that's not always the case. That doesn't mean to say that they don't have to be a customer. It's just that they don't always want to buy right now. We need to be aware of that. So don't ever think that that's how we should head into sales. And of course, we are very guilty in many circumstances, maybe not the people on this podcast, hopefully, this webinar, hopefully, but we are guilty of believing that the buyer's a bit stupid, to be honest, and that they don't really know anything that we do. And that is still prominent in the way that we are selling to some people. And the third thing in myth busting is actually you. So here's the first thing that's really interesting. We are usually told that in order to be a salesperson, you need to be extrovert. And of course, if you are an entrepreneur and you're running your own business, you're not necessarily going to be an extrovert person. But I want to make sure that you leave this webinar realizing that you can absolutely sell and you do not have to be an outgoing extrovert person. The second thing that's important is that we understand that we do not need scripts. And I do also appreciate that sometimes when you're new to selling, a script feels comfortable. It's like a crutch. But I would really encourage you throughout this webinar to listen to the things that we talk about and realize you don't need your scripts. You've actually already got your own personal script, which is far more powerful than anything you could write down. Also, that we need these very special skills to be a salesperson. Well, actually, you'll see again that you already have all of the skills required to be able to sell. And let's talk about tricks, because we know for a fact that there are a lot of salespeople who are definitely into a bit of trickery, trying to make us believe certain things, trying to make us feel like we're a little bit uncomfortable if we don't buy what they've got to sell. And I think we've probably all had that experience, which is why in the chat, some of the words you've used were probably a bit nervous, don't like being sold to, and those similar words. Yeah, let's get rid of all of those 3 myths. And let's talk a little bit about where I've come to in sales. And of course, this is my methodology and this is my feelings. But as I mentioned before, it's based on 32 years of selling, of being trained this way, how to sell, and knowing that it just didn't ever feel quite right. I was always trained beautifully how to sell, and then went back out to my customers and didn't do hardly any of the things that they had told me I should be doing. And yet every time I was hitting targets and I was achieving my revenue quotas, etc. So there was something I was doing that was good and that was working. And so Live It, Love It, Sell It, which is my methodology, has come from everything that I sat and thought about. What was it that I did? How did I really work when I was selling? So this is the road trip, okay? So the Live It is all about, are you fit to travel? This is the bit where we really look at your mindset, and we start with you, because sales is actually all about you at the very beginning. If you don't believe in what you're doing and you don't have that confidence and understand your why, then it's really hard for your customer to connect with that why as well. So we have to start at the beginning. Are you fit to travel the sales road trip? And that's part of the work I do in all of the things I do, my book, my courses, my programs. The next stage is Love It, one of my favorites, but you'll see the word love does come into play a lot with the things I talk about, because you have to love what you do. And also we need to plan that route of that road trip, because otherwise we could most definitely take a wrong turning and maybe not even reach the destination. And finally, we need to look at Sell It, which is once we've got the Live It and the Love It all sorted out, the Sell It is about reaching the destination. So this is about being visible, this is about being curious, and then actually creating that thought leader piece that we're going to explore in the rest of this webinar. So Live It, Love It, Sell It is a most definite journey. And ultimately what you'll learn with anything I do is that life skills are sales skills. So, you know, when you look at this, everything you've been doing since you were tiny, and I mean really tiny, are the skills that you use to sell. So listening and questioning and being curious and connecting and actually negotiating. So any of you who've got children will know your children are the best negotiators on the planet. Mine certainly is, and he's now 15 and he's getting better by the day. So you know what? That's because they don't think about it. It's very subconscious, and it's just one of those lovely natural abilities that we all have. As we grow older, we get more fearful, and these skills come into the conscious place. And so we start thinking about them a bit too much and even overthinking. So life skills are sales skills. So next slide, John. Let me just tell you where I fell in love with sales, because this is really interesting, and I don't suppose I realised till actually a little bit after I lost my dad in 2015. I started to think about, what was it about Dad that I really learned, and what was it that he showed me that meant that sales was always that thing, and people were always the thing that I loved and I loved doing. And Dad ran the local sweet shop on the precinct. So this was when, in the old days, where we went to the shopping precinct and we had the greengrocer, the baker and the newsagent. And my dad ran the newsagent, and he was called John, and everybody knew John, everybody. And the thing about my dad was, I watched him as a small child, and he was always smiling, and he knew everyone who came in the shop. He knew their name, their children's names, their wives' names, and in many cases would have on the counter ready the things that they regularly bought from him. Back then, you know, many people bought cigarettes. He'd have their cigarettes, and he'd have everything on the counter ready for when they came in the shop. And the thing about that was, there was this lovely energy and connection that went on in that shop, and everybody came back again and again and again, and they all talked about my dad, and everybody knew Dad. But that was because of what he did and how he made his customers feel. And another thing my dad told me, next slide, John, was that there is no such word as can't. And of course, this is the title of my TEDx talk, but this was another thing I think that's driven me through my sales career, not in a competitive, aggressive way in sales, but just in that lovely human connective way, and understanding that when I couldn't personally achieve something, there was probably another way, and then appreciating that the other people felt that way too. So there was a massive lesson that I learned just from my dad, and that's kind of where I fell in love with selling. So from that, I had a look then at what is selling really all about. And of course, the conclusion is, obviously, selling is about loving. And then I made an acronym, because you can't beat a good acronym. And my acronym around loving is these beautiful words. And these beautiful words are the things that really create the reason why there is no secret to sales. And I'm just going to touch on these as we go through today, because I want you to start really thinking about how these words have such an impact on how you too sell to your customers. So the first one is the best place to start, of course, which is L, which is L for love. I actually found this, I think this was a card that you could buy on Valentine's Day, which I thought was really quite fun. I love you unconditionally, T's and C's apply. And of course, this really does have a great meaning for sales, because what we really want to achieve is that we love our customers unconditionally. Of course we do. You know, everyone wants to be loved unconditionally. Isn't that a wonderful way to love? But sometimes there are certain T's and C's applied. But one of the things I noticed in the sales training I always had when I was growing in my career was that there was always conditions to this love, because it was always on our terms as the salesperson, and there was never really that two-way relationship and connection that then I went away and created myself anyway. So love your customers as unconditionally as you can without attaching any T's and C's wherever possible, because if you can create that feeling with a customer, then there really is something special then for you to move forward with. So let's explore love a little bit more, because this is what I mentioned earlier in that whole live it part of the road trip. You have to love what you do. And I really truly mean that. And this is the moment for you to really take stock about the work that you do, because if you don't love what you do, how can anyone else be expected to buy in to what you do? It's a really lovely human thing, but when you truly love what you do, everyone can see it. They'll see it in your energy, they'll see it in how you speak about your product or your service. You will light up. And when you light up, it's almost contagious. So there's something very special about really loving what you do. It's so, so important and a great place to start. So I hope everyone on the webinar today can safely say to themselves, do you know what, I really actually do love what I do. I love what I do. I think most people can see that when I talk about it. The next thing around love is understanding and getting to know your customer. And this is obvious, isn't it? Of course it's obvious, but how much do we really take time to do this? How much do we dig deep into how our customers are feeling so that actually we really can create a relationship? If you were to meet a new friend in a bar, or even, dare I say, go on a date with somebody new, you would get to know that person before you ever wanted to continue down that journey of any kind of commitment. So we have to take this time to get to know our customers, and there's lots of ways to do that, especially with social media, which is incredible when you think about it. How much more informed are we now with social media? We can really get to know them and engage with them. But here's the thing, we can get to know our customer, but we also need to understand who their customer is, because this is the bit of the jigsaw that's so important. So understand them as our customer, and then understand who their customers are. My goodness me, you've got such a bigger connection to our customers. Now you can start falling in love with each other, maybe not literally, but this is where you really connect on the best level. Next slide, John. And Simon Sinek, so he's kind of one of my favorites. So I discovered Simon Sinek probably 4 years ago, and I started to read his book, Start With Why, and it really resonated with me. And I realized that one of the reasons that I was successful in sales was because I was kind of doing the Simon way and not the way the trainers were telling me. The trainers were saying, this is what we sell, this is how we sell it, do you want to buy it? And anyone who knows Simon Sinek, he talks about starting with why. So you work out the why first, and then how, and then what. You literally reverse it round. He's got a great TEDx talk called The Golden Circle. So look that up if you want to find out more about him. But he talks very much on a human level. And this is one of the things he said, people don't buy what you do. And I absolutely 100%, I know this. I don't just believe this, I know this. They don't buy what you do. They buy why you do it, because they will connect with that passion and they will connect with you as a human. And what you do simply proves what you believe. Now there's the bit, that's the bit where if you don't love what you do, then people won't believe in it. They'll see that there's something that doesn't quite tie up. So Simon Sinek, check him out, because he's got an awful lot of great things to say when we're on the subject of love and loving your customers. And then the big thing that is attached to love in every way, in life as well as business, is emotion. So this is massive. We buy emotionally, so we have to take this really seriously. And if you've ever worked in corporate like I have, sometimes the emotion is actually quite beaten out of you, because it's all about those targets and figures and numbers, as I mentioned earlier. But this is the bit that makes the difference. This is the bit that makes you different. If you connect with your customers on an emotional level by really understanding their real needs, then actually that's the human connection that I talk about all the time. And it is the strongest and best way that you can begin your love relationship with your customer. So L for love. There's just a few ideas for you. Okay, let's look at the next slide. Opportunity. Well, this is a massive word, isn't it? Obviously, a lot of these words, I've got so much I can tell you about them, and that's where I go deeper when I'm doing things like my coaching and my courses. But this is to give you a flavour of the things that you can really start thinking about that are important in sales. So opportunity is massive. You've got opportunities all over the place, but here's your biggest opportunity. You may have heard me talk about the UHP. So in the old days, we had USPs. Anyone who's done old school traditional training, you will know that even today still we talk about your USP. What is it that makes you different? What makes you stand out from the crowd? That's your unique selling proposition. And then came the UVP, the unique value proposition, which of course is fabulous because value is one of my words in this presentation. But one of the most wonderful opportunities is your UHP. That's your unique human proposition. That's you, because there's no other you on the planet. And actually, when you look at Bupa and their latest campaign, what they said, next slide, John. They said this, and I thought, oh my goodness, this is fabulous, because this is what I'm actually going on about all the time. And Bupa actually said there are 7 billion types of normal on the planet. How lovely is that? And it's so true. And I think this is what I want to keep banging home to everybody, is that the biggest opportunity you have is your uniqueness and you, because there's no one else on the planet like you. So now it's about really honing in on that and thinking about how you use that in sales to your advantage. And there's a couple of things here that I thought about sharing with you, really, because this is where you connect and you become memorable. I like to call them isms. And really, it's what makes you different, what makes you unique. And this can be so many things. This could be the name of your business. This could be a sign-off that you always use. I always say ta-ta for now when I've written my emails and when I've finished my podcast. I always say it. I have no idea when I really started to say it, but it just became a regular thing that I did. And so anyone who hears that or sees that, who follows me, will recognize it's a consistency. I talk about being the dragon slayer. It's just a bit of fun, but people start to know that that's Jules White. She's the dragon slayer. Not that I'm that famous, of course. I hopefully one day, you never know. But the point is, it's about isms. It's about what makes you different. It might be you have certain colours you wear. It might be you have certain colour hair. It could be you wear a certain hat every time you pitch up and show up. It can be anything you like. But it's also other things. But these are just some of your little trademarks that you can create for yourself, which are really super. And many of us are a bit scared about embracing this stuff, but this is the stuff that makes us memorable, and people like it and they connect with us. Another thing that helps us to have a UHP is our language. So I mentioned ta-ta for now, but language is so important, and this is the reason why I don't like scripts. Because I don't want you to use a language that isn't your own. Now, if you were to write a script that was completely your own language, then even then I think it would feel like it wasn't quite you speaking in a very natural way. Your language is massively important. Things like your dialect are important. Things like the speed that you speak are important. You know, one of the really lovely things that was said to me about my book was somebody said it was like I was speaking to them when they were reading my book. And that was the best compliment in the world, because that's what I really wanted. I wanted to connect in a really natural way. So language is massive. So don't be scared to use your own language. Obviously, try not to make it offensive. But the point being is, this has to be you. And every time I read something that you've put out on a post on social media or maybe in a blog, I recognize that it's you once I start following you. There's that consistency, which is comforting to us as humans. So UHP, this is all part of your UHP. And then, of course, all of this creates your personal brand. And remember what Bupa says. There are 7 billion personal brands on this planet, if we want there to be. You don't have to be the same as the next person. And of course, the other thing that hits us quite hard in sales is something that we call comparisonitis. And you may have heard of this one. Because what we can do really easily is compare ourselves to other people who do the same as us. There are thousands of sales coaches on this planet. For sure, maybe more than thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, but none of them are Jules White, and I am not them. So I have to embrace who I am and bring through my UHP, which is what then makes me memorable, and people who want to work with me will do because they connect with me and it feels good. And that's how we work on emotion. So personal brand is another part of your UHP. Now value, here it is, this is the V. Oh my goodness. Value is massive, and again, in my work that I do, in my coaching, in my programs, I spend a lot of time on value. It's such an important part of selling, and value is often slightly overlooked in certain areas. So again, I want to just give you a couple of little things to think about when it comes to value, because for me this is what's really, really important. Value is actually about knowing your value, but also, next slide, John, you know what value you provide, and hopefully you do. But if you need to do work on that, then make sure you do, because it's really important that you understand what is the value I give to my customers. But again, it is so important that you understand what value means to your customer. Because we could be telling everybody, this is our value, this is what we're going to give you, this is what we know you need, but we haven't really done that exercise of having a conversation to find out actually, well, what does value really mean to your customer? Because we must never assume that we know what that looks like, ever. It's really dangerous. So what we do is we create what I call the value journey. And this journey is so important that we take our customers on a journey. Now, I know you're going to probably think to yourself, my goodness, that woman likes the word journey. But I actually really do. And it's important because as humans, the way we're wired, we have to go on a journey. So the next slide talks about, it was actually a saying that I came up with. And then I realized that it actually rhymed, which was quite cool, I thought. But you have to acknowledge the hell in order to sell. And this is true. And so what a lot of us might want to do or even do is we always go for selling the outcome, the positive. This is what I'm going to do for you. This is fantastic. And it's what I call the heaven, that bit. So it's all about us selling the heaven, you know, the dream. Let's sell the dream. But here's the thing. This is really important. If we don't acknowledge the hell, it's much, much harder to sell because we're human. So I use an example where, let's say one of you has a headache, because this is quite a simple example to use. So you've got a headache and I say to you, oh, I've got some tablets in my bag, there you go. I am providing you with heaven. I've got a tablet, it's going to make you feel better, there you go, there's the heaven. Or I could say, I'm really sorry that you've got a headache. I actually had one last week and it was horrible and I felt rotten. But I took these tablets and I felt a lot better and I've got some. Would you like one? Now what's happened there, and it's a really simple example, I've actually acknowledged the how, and then I've taken you on a value journey as to why I can help you feel better and the outcome I can give you. And the thing is about this is it just makes you feel like I care about you. It makes you feel like I've taken some time in your hell with you. But actually I haven't stayed in there too long. And then I've taken you on a transition to heaven. It is all about taking your customer on a journey. Somebody actually said to me once that there was a thing they learned which is called feel, felt, found. Some of you may have heard that. That's in traditional sales training. We tend to talk about feel, felt, found. And it kind of goes, I understand how you feel, and I have felt that way too. But what I found was, okay. And we were always taught to use that in a negotiation kind of objection handling scenario. So this is the point where the customer says, no, you know, I know what you're saying, but I'm just not sure that it's going to work. That's when we were always taught to bring out the feel, felt, found. But actually you can do it much more naturally and much earlier in just acknowledging with your customer in conversation that you already understand the pain they're in, the challenge they have, because you've had that conversation with them. That's just as powerful, and it stops the objections often if you acknowledge it earlier and take them on the value journey. So we have to step into the buyer's shoes. Now, Here's a question for you. This is an interactive bit. So we're back on the chat, everybody. Now, look, I really want you to think of this as something you're going to buy that is really considered, and it's an important purchase. And that's important, because if I said to you it's about a tin of beans that you're going to go and buy in Asda, this just kind of won't really work. You're all selling products and services that are actually very important, all right? So you want to think of it as you're the buyer. How does it feel when you buy something really considered and important? And I want you to put these three things in order of preference. What's the first thing you consider, the second thing, and then the third thing? So 1, 2, 3. Pop them in the chat, the order that they would come in order for you to actually make that purchase, all right? Now, the reason why I'm asking this is because I just want to see what the outcome is from this group on the webinar today. What happens in a lot of the scenarios I'm in classroom, perhaps workshop, face-to-face workshops, even just coaching in smaller groups. I ask this question, and it's very often the same kind of answers that come back. So I'm really curious which order you're going to put these in. And my lovely Sarah is very frantically just doing a little bit of collating in the background for me as these come in, because this is a really important thing that we should talk about at this point, because we are talking about value. So I'm just waiting for some of these to come in, which is great. I'm sort of seeing them at the bottom of my screen as well, which is good. Sarah, how are we doing?
Sorry, Jules. Yeah. The
most quick work.
Yeah, no, it's fine. The most consistent one that came out was value.
Okay.
As the number one, followed by who.
Okay.
And then obviously price. And in fact, price came last in about a third of the cases as well.
Fantastic. Right, so obviously, look, there's 22 odd people, I think, in this webinar at the moment. And that is an amazing result. And it is the result I expected. It's always a big risk for me to do this, and I do it live on purpose, because I don't know whether price might come in top, but it very, very rarely does, because what we are doing is we're considering ourselves as the buyer. So what's really important to us? And value is clearly, just in this little exercise, really important. Now, here's the thing to think about. The next time you're worrying about, am I too expensive? Or is my price too high? Or even you might be wondering whether your price is too low. We often get very, very hung up in that place of price. But when you realize that the sales journey is actually much more about value, and particularly what else came in there was who, so the person you're buying from, then you now need to start thinking, when these price worries come in, build it from the other side. Start thinking, okay, so what's the value I give, and what does value mean to that customer? When you start connecting those things, price very rarely actually has to come into play. Very interesting. I have to tell you, I have walked away from buying things that I really wanted because of the person who was serving me. And that is a really true story. It sounds mean, but I just didn't want to buy from them. There was something that happened where we didn't connect. So value, it's a biggie, and there's a lot more to it. So let's talk about that if anyone's interested, because I love that conversation. So the I of loving is all about integrity. So I love this. I love all of it, obviously, but integrity is one of my values. It's one of my real core values. I was definitely brought up knowing that you absolutely do not tell a lie. You will always get found out if you do. So you can 100% guarantee that I would never be able to lie to you, because you'd know, I think, that I was lying, not that I even attempt it. Because even though my mum and dad are no longer here, I always feel like they might just be watching over me. So integrity is massive in sales, massive. And the irony is that a lot of the sales training I had, which I know still goes on out there, a lot of that training actually does lack a little bit of integrity. It is about trying to trick people into certain behavior when they're selling. And I just don't see any mileage in this kind of thing, if I'm really honest with you. So integrity for me is massively important. Two things here, the two T's, transparency and trust. We all know that in relationships, be it friendships, husband and wife relationships, partners, business relationships, there's a massive, massive thing for us as humans, which is called trust. And if that trust is broken, it's one of the hardest things that we find able to recover from. And so the same applies in sales. We have to build the right to be trusted. And so integrity is massive when we're selling. Do not promise things that you can't fulfill. And if you could fulfill it, but then something's happened where you can't, please just be honest and be transparent. And your customers will love you for it because they know where you are. If there's a really bad situation, I know for a fact, if I've been told about it and I then had my expectations managed, then I will be fine about it. It really is a human trait of ours. But none of this, book now because it's not available tomorrow, none of this 3 seats only left. Because even if that's true, it has that air about it that I don't particularly believe that's true, because I know it's a sales tactic that can be taught. So let's just be honest. We've got a webinar going on. We'd love you to come. We don't need to say there's only 3 places left. We can use the time scarcity because it might be happening today, so then there won't be any time left because it's happening. That's not lying and that's not trickery. Transparency and trust are the big pieces that you can use when you are building your relationships in sales. Now, the other thing is never assume, because I think somebody said this many times to me when I've used this in training, because it makes an ass out of you and me, because if any of you know that one, of course, that's there to be seen. But it is really important that we don't assume anything. I do an exercise in my courses and my workshops where we get into pairs and we actually answer questions about each other with no dialogue. And it's a wonderful example of 100% assuming about that person. And it's delightful to watch how wrong those answers are. And we have a lot of fun with it, but it really does make the point that as humans, we judge very, very quickly what that person's like, what that person looks like. So therefore, this is what they prefer. And that is just not the best way to create these amazing relationships in sales. So just ask, just have a human conversation, because that's the best way to find out. And here's the other gem. And yes, I know, you've probably seen this. Of course you have. You've been doing this since you were probably born, I would say. Not that most of us remember that moment precisely, but we have to listen. And listening is one of the hardest skills that you will ever experience in your life. It's a life skill, but to actually master it, it's massive. How many of you have children when they come in from school? And of course, I know we're homeschooling, aren't we, right now? Sam will come in from school and want to download his whole day to me from being at school, and I adore him for it. But I may be in the middle of writing a blog or preparing some training, and of course, what am I doing? I'm not really listening to everything that he's downloading. I may have created this lovely art of nodding and umming at the right time, but of course this is not what we're talking about here. This is about really listening. And so are you really hearing what your customers want? And not just the kind of audible listening, actually reading on social media and hearing what people are talking about and what people are saying and how they're feeling. That's listening, and that's what it's all about. This is a massive part of building that integrity so people really feel like you care about them. So it's not about what you want to sell them, it's actually about them telling you what they want to buy from you and what they need. All right, it's massive, this one. Nurture. You see, I'm clearly in love with every single one of my words in this this loving thing that I have here, because this is a really big one. You know, for many, many years, we have not been trained and given the time to even use this word. It's not been about nurturing. That's far too slow. We need to get people through the sales process, close them down, take their money and on to the next one. Nurture is the most wonderful thing that you can now adopt in sales. And that means you've got to have patience. Now, this picture is the Oriana cruise ship, which I believe is not even in service anymore, which is a little bit sad. And this is down in Southampton. So this is my picture. And this is a story about my dad. So when my dad lost mum, which was 2012, he was obviously brokenhearted. He was devastated. And I had to try and, I guess, nurture him to embrace life again and live, etc. Now, he loved going on cruises. But I said to him, even I would say a year after we lost mum, I gave it some time. I said, Dad, you should go on a cruise. And he said to me, I won't ever go on a cruise without your mum. And I kind of thought, this is a little bit difficult because I don't think he's ever going to do it. So I just used to gently show pictures of cruise ships, or I used to just mention it, but it was really, really delicate, very delicate. And then one day, about 18 months after mum died, he rang me because he would call me every day and he said, I'm in the travel agent. So I said, oh, are you? Okay. He said, yeah, I'll see you later. And he put the phone down. And then when I got home, he got the brochures on the table of all the cruises. Now, see, at that point, I could easily have said to him, right, Dad, which one are you going to book? Let's get it booked. Because I would have done that. I would have encouraged him, but it was still too soon. So I just acknowledged the brochures and we had a chat. And then 6 months later, I suspect it was, he called me again and he said, I'm in the travel agent. So I said, oh, okay. And what are you up to today? Oh, well, I've just booked a cruise. He said, see you later. And then he hung up. Now, the moral to this story is obviously it's about my dad, so it's lovely to tell, but I truly had to nurture him to that sale. He would never have gone if I'd pushed him too hard. He would have pushed back every time, and he had the most amazing cruise. He had the most amazing journey. He went on 2 more after that, and he met amazing friends. He would never have done that if I had pushed him into that sale. So nurture is amazing and massive. So the thing about nurture, next slide, John, is about giving people options. So it's about making it easy for your customer to buy from you and then nurturing them through their own buying journey. So, you know, it's really not our journey, this. And there's so many bosses I've had and trainers I've had who have always said it's the salesperson who drives the journey of the sale. But I have to tell you that that is a secret that is not true. And it's also not a secret that we know that's being said out there. We have to allow the buyer to take this journey. And then we walk alongside them on this journey and hold their hand. It's a much nicer way of thinking of it. But it's their choice, not yours. And when they trust you and you've built all of that lovely relationship that we've just been talking about, then actually you can easily advise them and support them and coach them through their journey. The options are massive, and the buyer is king. Really? This is so true. On the next slide, John, we've got some really good statistics, which I think I used in the information that I sent out about the webinar. But this is a true stat. 70% of buyers fully define their needs on their own before engaging with a sales representative. And 44% identify specific solutions before reaching out to a seller. This is the biggie. Because what's happened here is that in my day, when I first started selling, gosh, I sound so old, don't I? We didn't have the internet. We didn't have social media and we didn't have the internet. So when a salesperson said, we are the leading UK #1, then the buyer went, oh, great, fabulous. But if you say that today, it's so easy for me to Google. I can do complete due diligence on you. I can find out exactly who you are. I'm a complete private investigator if I want to be. So this is the thing. We are actually now marketeers. We're marketeers as much as we are salespeople. So if the buyer is 70% along that journey and he hasn't even asked you, spoken to you, or engaged with you, what do we have to do as salespeople? Well, we have to be in sight at that very first part of the journey. So that's through all of the different things that we can then do to be visible. Because at the point they come to buy, we need to have been in that shortlist. And in order to be in the shortlist, we have to be a thought leader. And we have to be visible. We have to be in front of them. Today's sales process takes 22% longer than 5 years ago. That's huge, isn't it? I mean, if there's anything else that screams to us right now, it's that we have to now be patient. And that doesn't mean to say we've got to sit forever waiting for the sale. Some people will buy much quicker than other people. But it's getting the right people to buy the product that you're selling or the service that you're selling. And if that takes a bit longer, then it's worth it, because they will then be your salespeople. They will then give your testimonials. They will then be your advocate for what you do. And so it's massively worth putting in this effort and loving your customers, as we've talked about. And the G, finally, of loving is giving. And this is really important, because this is part of that bit before the 70% through that journey. This is where we come in as giving. So how can we give as salespeople? I do not mean give everything away free, by the way. But look, this is the great way to give. Webinars, you know, they don't have to be paid for. They can be free. And it's just a great way of showing who you are, what your expertise is, and giving something for people to take away with them. So what's involved in giving? Here's a few little ideas for you when you think about the giving part. Be a thought leader. Be a thought leader. What is it that you know? You are, I would say, an expert in what you do. And not everyone else is, okay? So be that thought leader. I got halfway through writing my book and I said, I'm not writing anymore, to my writing coach. And she said, why? What's the matter? I said, well, everybody knows this stuff. Everybody knows it's stupid. Everybody knows this. And she let me have a little break. And then when I came back, she said to me, people don't know everything you know. People do want your expertise and they do want to know and hear what you've got to say. And I finished writing my book, and I'm obviously delighted that I did. You are the same. You are a thought leader in what you do. So show people your expertise and give them snippets and give them an idea of how you can help them. You don't have to give it all away. You just have to show them who you are. This is your personal brand coming in here. This is your UHP. It's all part of being a thought leader. The next thing, always be helping. If you always come from this place of wanting to help and giving, but expecting nothing back in return, you know, Simon Sinek talked about this as well, then it's a really fabulous human trait to have, and people will remember you. People will remember that you had rich content that you were sharing. People will remember your blogs you wrote. I do a podcast. People will remember the podcast that I've recorded and the people I've had conversations with to give even more value. This is all about helping and giving and sharing. That's what happens when you do the G, which is the giving. And then, of course, you provide outcomes. So if people are going to engage with you, then they need to understand the outcome they may get from working with you. And that's by showing them all of the people you've worked with, testimonials, case studies. It could be a free guide, which we call lead magnets. Some of you may have those. That's all about giving and showing outcomes. It's massive. This is your stage. This very first part of this sales journey is now your stage to show people who you are as real you. And so this is loving. Love, opportunity, value, integrity, nurture and giving. This is what sales is all about. Next slide, John. So there's this guy here, Lido Anthony Lee Iacocca. God knows whether I've said that right, but I found this quote from this guy and I thought, oh, this is great. And this guy is from like back in the 60s, you know. He was in the automobile trade over in the USA, and he developed you know, brands like Ford and Mustang, who all of us have heard of. And this is what he said: business, after all, is nothing more than a bunch of human relationships. Oh my goodness, how amazing is that? Because this is true. There is no secret to this, guys, because sales is all about human relationships. And then when you look at the next slide, what comes from relationships, you create them, and you create them on and offline. And this is the really important bit. Always be creating relationships, connecting with people in the conversations, taking the conversations offline. Even in the situation we're in now, we're probably having even better conversations, I would say, than we have many times before. And of course, the human conversation is where it all starts. This is one of your greatest assets, apart from your UHP, is the fact that you can have a human conversation. Don't fear conversation, and don't feel like sales conversations have to be structured and scripted. Sales conversations are just like this, just chatting, talking about your thoughts, asking questions, and finding out about that person. The human conversation, just like having a conversation with a friend in a bar. I often say, you know, when you meet a new person for a coffee, do you suddenly whip out a piece of paper and start asking a list of questions? Bye, Liz. Thanks for joining, my darling. A list of questions there, you know, just to ask, oh, I just need to ask you these questions. You just wouldn't do it because you're absolutely capable of having a human conversation. And conversations don't just give us a platform to show who we are, but they also allow us to find out who our customer is. And we must always start with the customer. And this is where I'm talking about conversations that are on posts on social media, in the comments, their conversations, conversations on podcasts, conversations in blogs. We're having conversations everywhere. And even if it's not a two-way conversation, we can still have that conversation with just that kind of one-way street. And then we can read what everybody else is thinking out there too. Conversations are massive. Keep having them and always start with the customer. And here's another guy who you'll know. Well, you might not know, but you wouldn't be able to microwave anything if it wasn't for this guy, because he created the microwave power transmission, Mr. William C. Brown. And he said, again back then, the true language of commerce is the natural conversation between human beings. So when you're thinking about sales, I really want you to start thinking about all those amazing skills that you already have. And here's the story, just to finish, with why this is so important and why I know this works. So I had a position at this beautiful venue, which was head of sales, and I was thrown into this position, having been a national sales manager, out selling on the road. Suddenly I was made head of sales, in charge of 14 people who were 2 million off their £6 million target. So we were missing target by 2 million. That's massive. And our previous boss had been very much about number of calls, we're missing target, what shall we do, boss? We need to sell more. So he was very much driven by all of those sales myths that I talked about earlier on in the presentation. Now, I had to take this team and I had to try and turn around that result so that we hit the 6 million. And our lead time to sale was probably 6 months. So actually we had a lot of work to do. We certainly weren't going to hit it overnight. But what was I going to do with the 14 people who were on their knees, demotivated and devastated that they were failing? Well, I certainly couldn't put targets in place, and I certainly couldn't drive revenue, because that wasn't going to work for any of us. So we got together as a team. We looked at every single individual in that team, and we looked at their strengths and their values and what they loved doing. And I created a strategy with them, as to what area they would like to work in that business, and massive complementing each other with their skill set. I had a team of 14 amazing salespeople, all very, very different. There's your UHP. We then had monthly meetings where we never talked about the target. We talked about how are we going, what are the relationships we're building, what's working, what isn't, shared practice, loving our customers, because we loved what we did. Look at this beautiful venue. Why wouldn't we love selling this? And eventually, after 18 months, which was really hard work, and let me just tell you, we had a screen on the wall in the office with all of the figures on and all of the targets visible to show them what they were achieving, if that was what they needed, but no focus on it. After 18 months, we hit the 6 million by £180,000. Now that's a true story. And when you dissect that story, there was nothing in there that was about chasing target, chasing numbers, and chasing revenue. But everything about what we did was about loving our customers. So the reason why there is no secret to sales is because we absolutely know everything that we need to know about selling. Next slide, John. Because life skills are sales skills, and you already have every single one of those skills that you need in order to sell. So what one thing will you do? Let's just put the last thing in the chat, which I'd love to know. We won't necessarily shout all of these out, but I would love to know, what one thing will you do differently after this webinar? One thing that you have taken away from this webinar that you would like to do differently. And if you can't think of it right now, then absolutely have a think about it and do let me know. Isms, yeah, I see that, Sarah, your isms. So I love isms. It's what makes people memorable, you know. I remember people because of their isms. Okay, next slide, John. So just quickly, if you want to connect, if you want to listen to more of me chatting to amazing guests, I have a podcast called The Human Conversation, which is obviously a great name considering all the things that I talk about. Also, John, I have my book. Yeah, I should have it here actually somewhere, and I don't even have it here, look. The Live It, Love It, Sell It book. Honestly, it's a great place to start if you want to know any more in depth about the whole methodology around the sales road trip. And then, of course, there's other ways that we can work together. Oh, I wanted to show you this. This is so cool. So when I published my book, I asked everybody who had the book to send me a picture of where they had the book. So this is actually the book Sales Road Trip. And it's actually been to New Zealand, it's been in Delhi airport. This one at the bottom is actually the Hudson River in the background in New York. It's been in Hungary, it's been in Budapest there. Honestly, this book has been all over the world. It's very exciting. If anyone has written a book or is writing a book, do this. It's such a lovely thing to be able to look back at when you do finally look at how far you've come as well. So. And then, of course, there's just a couple of other ways. I have a UHP product, which is for corporate teams. So this is for sales teams. And then, I took it to Jamaica, Kirsty said. Oh, that's fantastic. Kirsty, I hope you took a picture of it for me. But the UHP experience, this is actually a really big program where I work very much in depth with your sales team, but it's gone online. Because of everything we're going through at the moment, it's now in bite-sized sessions. And then, of course, John, on from that, I've got the Pick and Mix program for legends only. This is much more an entrepreneurial sales program, but this is cool because this is named after my dad's influence from the newsagents. So it means you can kind of pick and mix which modules you do. And then finally, I think this is my one-to-one coaching, obviously, which is really in depth and I just adore doing because it is definitely all about you. So we're coming to the end. Please let's have a virtual cuppa if you think that we should explore more chatting about sales and how you may like to fall in love even more with sales. All my links are here, but my links are also at the bottom of any emails that I've sent you to. And the next webinar, this is really important, is Monday, next Monday. So if you've enjoyed this, and I really hope you have, next Monday, I'm talking about selling in a pandemic, and that's very interesting because I've got some really great information about research we're doing during the pandemic, and I can just give you a little bit more insight into what's working, what's not working, and also perhaps a strategy for you coming through this pandemic and how you sell, because we still need to sell. So, any questions? Please put them into the chat. If you've got anything you want to ask now, please do, and I will definitely answer them here and now. But if not, you are very welcome to ask any questions after the webinar and message me directly, and I will most definitely like to help you. I hope you've enjoyed our webinar. Thank you so much, Jules. That's okay. Brilliant. Glad you enjoyed it. I can't believe we've done it. We did it. Take 2 worked. Thank you so much to John, who's done my slides for me, and also to Sarah, who has managed my chat for me today, which has made it so much easier. And thank you for coming and joining me. And I hope if you're interested, I might see you next week for my next webinar. Thanks, guys. Take lots of care and see you again soon.